Welcome back to Breaking More Joy. I'm Janet Dalglish, and in this season, Rekindle, we've been exploring how women can rekindle our romance with our purpose, our joy, and our personal power, especially in our working lives. And if you've been here from the beginning, or even if you've joined partway through, I want to begin this final episode of season one with gratitude. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your willingness to question the stories you've been taught about work, about worth and effort, and about what it means to live a meaningful life as a woman of purpose. This first season was never about fixing you because you're not broken, obviously. It was never about becoming more productive, more impressive, or more palatable. It was about remembering something essential, and that is something many of us were trained to abandon early on. On the surface, Rekindle has been about women's working lives, but underneath that, it has always been about the question, how do women tap into the joy of contributing and fulfilling our purpose without sacrificing ourselves in the process? Because the systems in which we grew up were designed in order for men to be able to do that, not for women. And particularly for white men, for straight men, for well educated, upper class, rich men, and the list goes on. Because most of us were taught a really specific set of equations. We were taught that contribution has to equal depletion. We were taught that meaningful work has to be exhausting. And we were taught that caring deeply requires us to burn out. And if you have believed in the past that that was the price of making a difference, I want you to hear this clearly. That model is broken. It is no longer relevant. It is still largely at play, but we get a choice about how we interact with it. So in this season, we began by naming that quiet ache that so many women carry, the moment where you recognize that your work still matters, but it no longer feeds you. Not because you're ungrateful, not because you've failed, but because something inside you is asking for a more evolved and more sustainable relationship with your purpose. We explored why women feel we have to work twice as hard, not as a confidence issue, but as a historical inheritance carried in the nervous system that tells us I have to prove myself all the time because we've always been told in so many different areas and so many different ways women don't belong here. We talked about what happens when the brain thinks that your career is a survival situation and how prove it mode is not a flaw, but a learned response. We reclaimed some of the key planetary allies and how they link up with this relationship we have with our own purpose. We reclaimed a relationship, a positive relationship with Saturn, not as punishment, but as the part of us that has wisdom around structure and pacing and this radical importance of celebrating the path, not merely the destination. We reclaimed the power of Jupiter, which is this great expander, the part of us that actually knows how to imagine futures that our left brain, our logical brain, can't predict based on the past. The part of us that knows that innovation doesn't come from playing it safe. We talked about Venus and how she represents the part of us that knows how to do unapologetic desire, how to name our desires, how to embrace our right to name our desire, including the impossible ones or the ones that are deemed inappropriate or the ones that we don't know whether we can achieve without any shame or justification. We rekindled our relationship with Mars, not as this sense of hustle or force, but as a clean, self-trusting access to our most aligned actions. We talked about the sun and moon. We talked about the solar principle of individuation, this yearning towards becoming who you actually are, and how that needs to balance with the lunar principle, with the moon, that reminds us that we are relational beings, that we long for belonging and care and connection, and that we cannot turn ourselves into a doormat in order to please those who would have us ignore the solar principle. Together, all of these forces tell a really different story about what meaningful work can look like. Most women were taught to focus on being competent and useful and resilient. We were taught to endure and to tolerate the discomfort of fitting into the system that wasn't built for us. But if we want to contribute at full volume over the long term, not in short heroic bursts followed by collapse, but as a long-term sustainable phenomenon, then joy is required. This is not optional. Our joy matters. Joy is what keeps the nervous system regulated. It's what allows creativity to flow. It's what restores perspective. It's what prevents bitterness from taking root. It's what makes leadership sustainable. A woman devoted to having joy in her life is not frivolous. She is strategic. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Many systems benefit when women are tired, self-doubting, and disconnected from their joy. Joy is not a reward for doing everything right. It is nervous system information. It tells the body you are safe enough to expand. And expansion is where innovation, leadership, courage, and meaningful change all live. This is why joy has always been political, and in women's hands, why it has been dangerous. Joy says, my state of being is not dependent upon what those in power have decided for me. And this is the really critical piece. Joy can coexist with grief and exhaustion and anxiety, not as a band-aid to cover up the rot of suffering, but as an act of grace for ourselves, a form of self-replenishment and a fuel for the long work of actual change. And here is something, I really want to say this explicitly because it's so easy to miss. Joy is not something that you randomly have or don't have. It's not a reward and it's not an afterthought. It's not toxic positivity and it's not spiritual bypassing. It is an essential skill that we build through discipline. Like any skill, it requires practice, attention, willingness to explore new ways, and devotion. And joy can be a really fierce component of getting through tough times. I first learned this vicariously from my parents when they related stories of how they experienced joy, how they found joy, how the adults around them deliberately fed joy into their world when they were teenagers in very different parts of England during the Blitz, enduring the nightly bombing raids and the strange terror of going to the shelters or the trenches at my dad's boarding school. I learned this at an impromptu ceilidh with my future in-laws and their neighbours in a back street of Belfast where the helicopters flew overhead and young, frightened-looking armed British soldiers cruised the streets in armoured vehicles. And I shared the laughter and the applause when my fiance and I contributed a Bob Dylan protest song to the mix. I learned it again in the 1980s while turning the twice daily bomb checks in Harrods department store into a competitive game with my colleagues of how creatively can we do this without letting the customers catch us at it, because this was happening while the store was open and people were coming through. I learned it at my beloved father's deathbed as family gathered to share with him and with each other memories and stories of love and laughter and things that had happened that had never been revealed before, to the point where I thought we might get barred from the hospital for being too loud. There was so much joy present alongside the grief. And I've learned it sitting at the feet of Black women and women from the queer community and women living with disability and chronic illness, whose relentless devotion to joy is not a denial of suffering, but an essential part of thriving. In many ways, I've been learning it every day of my life. Joy is a work in progress. I'll never get it all done, and I'm getting better at it all the time. Joy is an act of political resistance, and it's a skill for healing, and it's a nuanced experience that we cannot dictate or describe for each other because joy is so exquisitely personal. Rekindling the romance with your purpose in the world does not mean quitting everything, instantly finding the perfect job, or forcing joy into every minute of every day. It means fully accepting your whole emotional landscape without shame or guilt for how you feel, And it means developing a relationship with joy that you can rely upon. It means noticing when your work stops feeding you and responding with compassion, not with punishment or self-abandonment. And it means shaping your purpose in ways that honor your humanity. Rekindling the romance with your purpose is not a moment, it is a decision and a commitment. And it should also be a delightful spark of possibility that has a little part of you. It might be a teeny tiny part of you, but it has a part of you thinking, ooh, I wonder what could happen next. So this is the end of season one Rekindle, but not the end of Wreaking More Joy. This podcast and this Substack platform will continue to explore women's relationships with purpose and power and joy and work with as much depth, nuance, and tenderness as I can muster. But for now, I want to leave you with this. You do not have to earn your right to exist in your work. You do not have to bleed in order to be valuable. You do not have to choose between contribution and joy. And if no one has told you this lately, please remember that what you are doing matters, who you are matters, and you are allowed to have it feel good. So thank you for walking this season with me. It's been an honor and a privilege to have you here. Until next time, please be gentle with yourself, practice joy like the discipline that it is, and keep wreaking more of it out into the world. Thank you.